Thanks, Marc. Thanks for the invitation. Welcome to Lyon. Welcome in Lyon. I hope and I wish you enjoy the festival, the first night. Who was here last night? Okay. I recommend to visit this evening on Friday because we receive many more people, and you know, Saturday is the original date of the Light Festival, the famous 8th of December, and we receive, Mark, many people, a lot. So with Lucy, we prepare two sessions, the first with Thierry, and the second with me. And can you give the topic? No,
the title.
The idea of the...
Yeah. Well, we started with thinking about cities and how creative cities can help us to redesign cities with light and creative lighting. But now, Jean-François is going to call on stage some artists, some academics, various experts to talk about new forms of creative lighting.
Thanks. We invite to come to stage, et on est, comment on dit, on a la bonne éducation d'inviter d'abord Titia X, please. Can you come on the stage? You come from Netherlands? Yes, thank you. Please, thank you. After, it's my colleague. He works a long time in Lyon. At the beginning, not in the city, not in the public lighting department, and after in the public lighting department, Jérôme Donat. The third partner is Thorsten Bauer from Germany, famous team Urban Screen. You made a presentation on the Museum of Confluence for 3 years. And the last is Howard Griffin from UK. It's a new member of Lucy. Please, I will continue in French. I am a little tired with my production and I don't sleep very well and so many times. Donc les nouvelles formes de lumière créative, j'ai intitulé cette présentation de l'expérience de la mise en valeur du patrimonial en passant par le jeu du détournement des éléments architecturaux et aussi par la tendance de s'emparer d'une manière spectaculaire de l'espace urbain et des créations lumière éphémères qui évoluent régulièrement à l'occasion des festivals lumière et d'autres événements ponctuels. Il nous a paru aussi intéressant de faire témoigner des personnes qui mènent une réflexion plus en profondeur sur ces nouvelles formes de créativité et de lumière urbaine. Voilà. Donc la première personne que je vais inviter à faire la présentation, ça sera Jérôme Donat. C'était intéressant de démarrer avec Jérôme parce que c'est quelqu'un qui a une expérience de la lumière pérenne. Et Michel Lemieux a dit avant que les gens qui travaillent sur la lumière pérenne étaient aussi des artistes. J'ai même envie de dire, ils sont des artistes, ils ne sont pas aussi, ils sont des artistes. Et il pourra nous expliquer sa démarche, puisque, comme vous le savez, la direction de l'éclairage urbain de la ville de Lyon participe chaque année à la création d'une œuvre originale et sur des lieux toujours différents dans le parcours de la Fête des Lumières. Jérôme Donat, à toi.
Eh ben, bonjour à tous et à toutes. Je suis déjà très honoré de pouvoir présenter effectivement le travail que que je fais au sein de la direction de l'éclairage urbain. C'est bien de pouvoir s'exprimer sur ce travail-là. Effectivement, comme l'a dit Jean-François, je travaille depuis maintenant longtemps à Lyon et je vieillis. J'ai commencé, après des études d'archi, j'ai travaillé dans un bureau d'études qui s'appelle les éclairagistes associés. C'est un célèbre cabinet d'éclairagistes à Lyon qui a œuvré pour, on va dire, la lumière pérenne. Et puis ensuite, j'ai rejoint les équipes de l'éclairage public. Et puis maintenant, je fais partie de l'éclairage urbain puisqu'on a changé de nom. Voilà, en gros. Depuis 2004, au sein de la direction, on propose effectivement une et exceptionnellement 2 œuvres chaque année pour la Fête des Lumières. C'est une autre partie de notre travail. Notre travail au quotidien, c'est quand même de faire la mise en lumière pérenne de la ville. Là, c'est s'exprimer avec un contenu différent, plus artistique. Et c'est bien d'être présent aussi sur cet énorme événement qui est incontournable et qui a aussi commencé au sein de la direction dans les années 99-2000. On se définit un peu comme des défricheurs de lieux parce que, étant le service municipal, on connaît bien la ville, c'est notre terrain de jeu toute l'année. Et l'idée, c'est aussi d'investir de nouveaux lieux. Alors, avant les événements tragiques, le champ de la ville était ouvert, on pouvait aller un peu de partout. Maintenant, le périmètre s'est un peu restreint. Mais effectivement, on a souvent proposé des projets et des spectacles sur des nouveaux lieux qui, après, ont été repris par des équipes artistiques dans les éditions précédentes. Bon, je vais en venir vite au sujet. On m'a demandé de présenter une démarche. Je vais vous présenter 3 projets. Un qui est une intervention pérenne, mais qui s'inspire d'une démarche Fête des Lumières. Et puis après, 2 projets sur la Fête des Lumières. Donc le premier projet qu'on voulait vous présenter, c'est le Ciné du Cher. C'est un bâtiment qui est dans un quartier, on va dire, un peu sensible, un peu défavorisé dans la ville, le quartier de la Duchère. C'est un projet qu'on a fait en 2012 et ce bâtiment, tout en béton, est une ancienne église qui avait été à l'époque dessiné et conçu par un architecte qui s'appelle Monsieur Janton et qui était un disciple de Le Corbusier. D'où ces volumes en béton composés de différentes formes géométriques. Cette architecture est à semi enterrée, donc c'est difficile d'en comprendre vraiment où sont l'entrée, comment elle est organisée. Et du coup, la nuit, on a cherché à lui donner une autre image. Donc la mise en lumière qu'on a proposée, elle est très chromatique, vous pouvez le voir. Pourquoi on a utilisé la couleur? C'est parce que effectivement, Le Corbusier, dans toutes ses architectures, a utilisé les couleurs primaires. Et on a voulu essayer de lui rendre un petit hommage aussi à travers cette intervention. L'idée aussi, c'est de pouvoir complètement faire apparaître ces volumes, en donner une autre forme pour qu'on donne une lecture complètement différente dans cet espace. Donc cette église qui est devenue un cinéma, je ne sais pas si je l'ai dit ça, mais c'est quand même important. Elle a une présence dans le quartier de la Duchère et pour nous c'est une pièce majeure. L'idée c'est quand même d'aller faire une intervention. Ils en ont parlé dans la première séance, comment on investit le territoire de la ville. Et ben, par le biais de ce projet, on investit un quartier un peu sensible et défavorisé en faisant une intervention. Alors la composition, la composition du projet, elle est assez simple. Pourquoi ça je vais quand même parler de ça. Pourquoi il y a un lien avec la Fête des Lumières? C'est parce que la Fête des Lumières aussi, elle permet d'ouvrir des nouvelles formes de création. Elle a permis aussi aux spectateurs de voir différentes interventions par tous les artistes qui ont pu passer. Et on peut se permettre de proposer des choses un peu plus osées. Il y a 20 ans en arrière, on n'aurait peut-être pas pu installer des couleurs aussi franches sur un bâtiment. La Fête des Lumières amène un nouveau regard et du coup, nous, artistes ou lighting designers, on peut se permettre d'avoir une proposition plus forte dans ce sens-là. Donc l'idée de la composition est simple. On a travaillé avec des projecteurs à découpe. Ça aussi, c'est une technique qui vient de l'événementiel. Et avec ces projecteurs, on a plaqué les différentes couleurs pour faire apparaître les différents volumes, puis une trame sur l'ensemble de la flèche en béton. La trame, c'était l'idée de mettre en valeur le bâtiment, mais c'était aussi de donner du sens en utilisant la pellicule, parce qu'aujourd'hui c'est un cinéma. Alors on m'annonce qu'il me reste la moitié de mon temps et j'ai été très long, donc je vais accélérer un petit peu. Voilà, d'autres images, puisque le bâtiment est traité sur ces 3 faces, ou même ces 4 faces. Je vais passer maintenant à un autre projet qui là est un projet événementiel qu'on a fait sur la place Antonin-Poncet en 2014. Je tiens à préciser que cette intervention, j'ai fait la conception avec un ancien collègue qui est parti, qui s'appelle Simon Miret-Godet. Il n'est pas dans la salle, je pense, mais en tout cas, je pense à lui sur ce projet parce que c'était une vraie complicité. Donc cette place, elle est proche de la place Bellecour. Elle est encadrée par des façades d'habitation au nord et puis la Grande Poste au sud. Et sur les côtés est et ouest, on peut soit voir le Rhône, enfin en tout cas ça débouche sur le Rhône, et de l'autre côté sur la place Bellecour. Finalement, le regard, il peut aller assez largement sur cette place. Et les premières inspirations, elles viennent aussi du lieu, même si vous allez voir qu'après on a essayé d'évoquer les galaxies, les étoiles, mais c'est aussi parce que cette place, elle n'est pas enfermée, elle n'enferme pas le regard, le regard est libre. Donc ce projet qui s'appelle l'Agnakea, d'abord en préambule, je voulais vous présenter Hélène Courtois, qui est une astrophysicienne lyonnaise. Et en fait, ce projet, il a une histoire assez particulière parce qu'il est né d'une rencontre entre une découverte scientifique qui a été faite par Hélène Courtois et puis une envie d'évoquer l'infiniment grand et le cosmos de par notre démarche. Et cette rencontre, elle a eu un fondement très très important dans le projet parce qu'elle nous a nourri le projet. Il faut savoir qu'après, vous découvrirez qu'il y a pas mal de projections d'images qui sont des galaxies qui nous entourent. Et toutes les images, elles nous ont été données et rendues accessibles par Hélène Courtois. Alors ce projet s'appelle l'Agnakea parce que l'Agnakea, en hawaïen, ça veut dire horizon céleste immense. C'est le nom qu'a donné Hélène Courtois à sa découverte. Et c'est nous le nom qu'on a donné à notre projet pour lui rendre hommage. Donc je ne vais pas vous parler de sa découverte trop longtemps, elle le fait beaucoup mieux que moi. Pour simplifier quand même et pour vous dire ce qu'elle a découvert, c'est qu'elle a réussi à cartographier en 4 dimensions notre espace, ce qui avait été jamais fait auparavant. Alors, ce projet, il a une scénographie particulière. On a voulu travailler sur des particules de lumière qui investissent l'espace. Elles sont statiques, elles sont désordonnées, elles forment une nuée, un amas de points lumineux, d'étoiles. Et donc du coup, on a créé une première installation qui est sur la pelouse centrale, qui était composée de, en gros, 1000 sphères lumineuses. On a détourné des pixels, on a installé des boules, un film particulier, et on en a fait des étoiles. Donc là, vous voyez, il y a une nuée de 1000 sphères. Et puis, la deuxième partie de la scénographie de notre projet, elle se faisait sur la façade avec une projection d'images. Et l'idée, c'était toujours de mélanger l'installation plastique avec l'image. Qu'est-ce qui est l'image? Qu'est-ce qui est les objets lumineux? On voulait créer en fait quelque chose d'un peu particulier. Donc là, je ne vais pas vous dérouler tout le déroulé du spectacle. Il aurait été bien qu'on puisse voir une petite vidéo, mais je n'avais pas le temps dans le format un peu court. En tout cas, je vais passer les différentes images. Là, vous voyez une découverte de la voûte céleste. Là, je vous montre une autre image aussi qui montre la dimension du projet. Donc, les 1000 sphères lumineuses étaient posées au sol sur la pelouse centrale. Et puis, la grande projection, elle était sur la façade. On a donné le début de la projection l'idée qu'on regardait à travers un Oculus. Et puis après, à travers les images qu'on propose, on a proposé un voyage, on va dire, intergalactique. Hein, puisqu'au début, on partait voir notre système solaire. Et puis après, on allait voir un peu plus loin pour revenir sur la place. Et puis après, créer des galaxies un peu de notre imaginaire. Je vous montre... quelques photos supplémentaires. Hein, avec ça, c'est des vraies galaxies hein, qui ont été prises par les satellites. Alors là, c'est vraiment la représentation de l'Aniakea, puisque Hélène Courtois, je vous l'ai pas dit, mais pour cartographier les galaxies, elle a été obligée d'inventer un système d'écriture. Et nous, dans notre projet, on a permis de créer une écriture graphique pour représenter sa découverte. Et aujourd'hui, quand elle va présenter son projet à travers le monde, elle utilise nos images et une petite vidéo de notre projet pour expliquer aussi sa découverte. Donc c'est vraiment quelque chose d'important. Je passe rapidement à la suite. Un petit clin d'œil, peut-être que Jean-François en parlera, mais la Fête des Lumières, ça permet aussi d'aller s'exporter à l'extérieur. Et ce projet a été présenté aussi en Équateur, à Quito, pour la première Fête des Lumières. Deuxième projet événementiel que je vous présente, c'est la piscine du Rhône. C'est un projet qu'on a fait en 2017, donc l'année dernière. Et la difficulté de cet espace, c'est que c'est un panorama de vide qui fait à peu près 380 mètres de long. Les grands pylônes qui ponctuent l'espace font 30 mètres. Et la nouvelle configuration de la fête nous impose aussi un point de vue, c'est la photo d'en haut, c'est-à-dire que ce projet était visible plutôt de la presqu'île, avec un point de vue privilégié qui était celui-ci. Donc on a appelé notre projet Météore parce que notre idée c'était pour parcourir la skyline de cet espace, c'était de faire arriver un objet lumineux non identifié qu'on a appelé un OLNI qui venait en fait découvrir la skyline de la piscine et qui venait créer un impact sur le bâtiment. Donc vous voyez, le météore est à peu près arrivé sur le bâtiment. Il va commencer à révéler un petit peu le bâtiment, parce que l'objectif aussi, même si notre inspiration, elle était plutôt basée sur un objet qui vient impacter une architecture moderne, l'idée c'est aussi de montrer l'architecture. Donc le bâtiment vient être révélé par la sphère lumineuse, et puis après la sphère lumineuse, elle va commencer à se balader sur l'ensemble de la skyline pour aller devant les piliers. La scénographie du projet, elle était finalement assez simple. On a suspendu 4 immenses tuiles sur les grands piliers pour faire de la projection d'images, de particules de lumière et donner un effet un peu aquatique. Et après, on a traité en lumière l'ensemble du soubassement de la piscine. La partie graphique, si vous voulez, elle s'inspire des particules, elle s'inspire de l'énergie lumineuse que le météore peut amener sur cet espace. Alors, on me signale que c'est fini, donc je vais vous montrer les différentes images qui ponctuent.
Prends 2 minutes, on lui accorde le temps de finir sa présentation.
Non, mais je veux pas prendre du temps sur les autres partenaires. Voilà, en fait, pour parler de ces projets, on a plein de choses à dire. C'est difficile de les présenter dans un format aussi court. Le jeu est intéressant, mais l'innovation en fait de ce projet, c'est surtout en fait que pour créer le météore, on a détourné, et c'est ça qui m'intéresse, c'est pour surprendre, pour prendre des risques, c'est aussi de détourner des objets. Et le météore, en fait, il volait grâce à un système de cable cam. C'est les systèmes qui font voler les caméras au-dessus des stades de foot ou au-dessus des événements. On a complètement détourné le système et on a installé une sphère qu'on a construite dans nos propres ateliers. J'en ai pas parlé, mais aussi un des challenges d'avoir un propos artistique à la direction de l'éclairage urbain, c'est aussi de travailler avec nos équipes, les employés municipaux. Et c'est aussi les inviter à réaliser des choses. Et ça, c'est aussi un challenge un peu compliqué. Voilà, je vais en terminer là et je laisse la suite. Merci de votre écoute.
De présentation, de revenir sur la démarche à la fois de création et la démarche de production. La prochaine intervenante est Titia X et Marc et l'équipe de Lucie, je tiens à te remercier. Titia, please. Parce que je ne connaissais pas le travail de Titia et j'ai été très très franchement, I love your installation, hein, really, daily, nightly, yes, bon. Donc Titia va nous présenter sa démarche artistique et on pourra échanger. Je voulais aussi vous expliquer notre démarche, c'est qu'on part de Jérôme. On part de l'éclairage pérenne, on arrive à l'éclairage événementiel sur beaucoup de créations qui sont dans l'espace urbain. Titia, c'est une vraie suite parce qu'elle est intervenue sur différents lieux dans l'espace urbain. Et après, nous aurons des gens qui sont, je dirais, qui sont quelquefois dans la recherche et dans la réflexion avec un certain recul sur nos différentes disciplines. Voilà, on a des créatifs et des gens qui sont créatifs et aussi qui observent ce qui se passe.
Well, thank you, Jean-François, and thank you for having me here. Hello, so my name is Titia X, and I'm a light artist I'm based in Amsterdam. And I'm going to show you 6 works, so I have to do it even quicker. The first 3 will be temporary works and the other 3 are permanent works. So I start with a temporary work, and this is, can you hear me? Yes, fine. This one was just recently, a few weeks ago, at the Glow Festival in Eindhoven. It's called The Walk, and it's about us. It's the walk we all make every day, day and night. We go around every year around the sun. And it's a sphere and a projection, of not as a projection, but it's a video, and people have to walk around it. It's our world, we can say. There's only one, but this is to show a little bit more of the images. And so you really, if you want to see the whole story, you have to walk around it. And this was the venue in Eindhoven at Glow. What also nice is about the walk that people, you can really get near to it. You can see it on a distance, but it's also near. It's touching you because of the light. Then this is also an installation that's traveling, the flower from the universe. And it's an interactive light installation. And it's based on our connection between nature and human. So we need the plants, and we need them to breathe, and they need their visitors, us, to shine. Otherwise, they won't survive. So it's the interactivity between the two. And this was in London, and this is in a pound, and you see the sensors, and it takes your color. So it's your own color from your clothes, and you can make the flower any color. And if other people put in their color, you will blend. So they will come together, and if you really are collaborated, you can make any color. This is a picture of the Light Festival in Jerusalem. It was on the east side of Jerusalem, and actually, there are a lot of groups who don't want to meet each other, but here, with light is also about emotion, and you just got connected to it, and then you see your color disappearing to a side, and then you think, oh, I'm now blending with this guy, so people are coming back to this installation, and they're coming together, and they try to make one color, and it's, It's a great installation, I think. And oh yeah, and the heart is from a brain cell because it's a technical flower. So, and this is also a temporary one. It was for the first edition of the Amsterdam Light Festival. And I wanted to make a statement because I think light festivals, a lot of people think it's about artificial light, but light, of course, is also about daylight. And also a statement because it's in Amsterdam, we have the skies, we have the water, we have the reflection. And so why not showing this? So I added on the skinny bridge the mirror, and the skinny bridge makes this disconnection in the river. Of course, we have here, also the rivers have a lot of bridges. But it gave back the visibility on the river again. And it made it very beautiful. And you see that also the water and the city blending into each other. And also in night. So it was, some people were upset because I covered the lights from the bridge. So they were like, okay, what are you doing? We have a light festival and now you're doing this. But actually I was also adding darkness to the city because there's a lot of pollution and a lot of people think we need more and more. But sometimes it's more coming together if you put out the lights. Well, maybe some of you know the Amsterdam Light Festival. You can take the boat. So this is a permanent light installation. It's in Utrecht, and it's 10 feet tall, I think. It's neon. It doesn't move at all. And it was just, they asked me because there was this kind of hidden church. People don't see it, and the residents... well, it was a kind of dark side, but also they made this route, permanent route, through the city. And they just asked, can you add some light to it? And I thought, well, this makes it clear. It's getting the church back to the street. And this is an old city with a lot of Christian heritage. And also it draws your eyes upstairs. So you're in the city, but this is, you have this moment, this private moment, and look upstairs, and yeah. Well. This one is based on these stones, dolmens, and. The dolmens are in part of the Netherlands and Germany and Denmark. It's a culture from 5,000 years ago, and they built these dolmens. And near these dolmens, this city of Emmen, they needed a tunnel. And they invited me over to give a tunnel vision. And they needed a tunnel because they want to replace their zoo. And that's important because people actually don't want to have tunnels. People hate tunnels. And so I did some research for why do people hate tunnels. And 40% of the people have also bad behavior in tunnels. They stopping, or they're going too fast or too slow. So they are actually afraid. Well, most of us probably also afraid in the dark, but in tunnels, a lot of people are also afraid. And I went to a university to look at it, how I could do it differently. Because why are we all afraid in tunnels and what is happening? And actually, the Dutch government was saying you're not allowed to do anything. We need static light, and it's safe. And I thought probably it's the opposite. We need dynamic light. Because we're coming from a dynamic outside and we're going into this tunnel, and suddenly everything is gray and static. So I proposed dynamic light, and that was really hard because I also want to explain this one, but well, okay. I did this together with people from the city, urban planners, and also from landscape, because I want also that the people can walk everywhere and that they can see the tunnel. But so what the problem was that this tunnel was that people think, well, who will respond to it? And we had no clue if it would be safe, and who's to blame? The constructor, or the artist, or the city, or the mayor. So, but I went to this university and put it in the simulator, and I thought it's great to drive in it. And so at the end, they said, okay, you can make this tunnel, and well, it's now going around the world, because actually that's about unloved places, and you feel it in a lot of parts in the cities, that you're not loved to be there, and that it's over you. I took the sound out of it. But it's all made modular, so you can change it. And I made a light program, so it's coming to you, but it's going also with you. And you have never, the beginning of the tunnel is never the same as the end. And I made it also, the light program is actually vertical and horizontal. So this is the last one, Juicy Lights. It's also a permanent installation at an old marketplace, old street in Amsterdam. And so these are pictures of the 60s, but the market is already 100 years old. And this is today. It's, let's see. This is the market street, but now this is a main route, so it's crossing the market street. And people came to me because they said, well, when it's 6 days a day, a week, the market, and when the market is gone, it's such an empty space. It's just nothing is happening, and they're missing the market, and they wanted to have something. And also the city said, well, we want to have a permanent work. And I came up with this. Stay like this? Okay. So the grapes. Well, the grapes are, of course, to honor the market people, but it's also daytime. So it's reflecting in the daytime. So you have also this object in the daytime. And then it's also the grapes are, the name of this neighborhood is about writers and poets. And the name of the street is Ten Kate. And his most famous poem is from 1870, and he's saying his most famous poem is called "To Creation," and he's saying, well, the paradise is here in your lap. So that's also why I wanted to use the grape, because the paradise, his image of the paradise is the grape. And here you see it when it's getting dark. And what's going to happen is, so in daytime you have this shiny, and in the night they're going to drip. They drip light. And so that's why the projector is in there. So it's dripping light, it's sipping. And it's actually, if you don't do anything and you just look at it, it's fine, and you go on. But if you go under the grape, you can activate it. And you will get more light, like a shower. You get more lights coming to you. Here you see also an example of one of the drops. And also what we did with the asphalt. Well, here you see the whole street. Here's again this traffic road, and So there is light inside, outside, and you can play with it. And here you see, so one person stood up beneath it, and it got another color. And you can also communicate with the other grapes, so you can make the whole street. And what I think about this work, it has to grow. It's new for people, and it stays. And so you see children playing with it very easily, and sometimes people working together, and then suddenly there's tourists who thinks, no, this is not possible because it's leaking light. And so I think it's about also to get back the street and discovering. Well, I have to stop. Okay, thank you.
Merci Titia. On va passer au prochain intervenant, Thorsten Bauer. Je vais dire un petit mot quand même sur Urban Screen parce que c'est une équipe qui pour moi est dans les pionniers du mapping. Et je dois dire que je les ai surtout découverts lors d'un mapping contest à Bucarest, en Roumanie, où vous avez gagné. On était dans le jury et je tiens aussi à remercier, je crois qu'ils sont là, nos amis qui organisent ce festival de mapping, ce grand concours. Voilà, mon ami Tamas Vaspori de Maxim Intensity. Ce qui est intéressant avec le travail d'Urban Screen, c'est que il y a, je pense, il va nous l'expliquer, une vraie réflexion. Ils ont été dans les premiers à jouer avec ces effets spéciaux dans l'espace public, mais sa démarche est beaucoup plus complète. Dans sa présentation, il nous dit que l'écran, the screen is over, mais j'ai envie de savoir aussi, et on a tous envie de savoir, quelle est la suite.
Okay, sorry, I didn't get the last thing because I had to put up my entrance later. Yeah, thank you for having me here today. It's a big honor to speak here in front of you as an audience. Today I'm gonna present some works I've done in the past from Urban Screen, but mainly my little presentation in the front is to reveal two major ideas concerning our daily topic that we discussed today of how lighting, urban lighting, permanent urban lighting is developing in my views in the next years to come. So we're gonna start with the convergence of lighting technology. So in my eyes, and this is also due to the development I personally did the last 3 years, and in this place a little correction, I'm not any longer the creative director, I'm the owner and kind of presidential of Urban Screen, so I took myself out of Urban Screen to dive a little bit more into the exact topic that we are discussing today in urban lighting and how artists views and can take a deeper influence in permanent installations in the years to come. So the first point is convergence of lighting technologies, and what I mean by that is that I see a big influence that the imaging technologies as we had in the last years, projection or these LED walls, more and more merge together with classical ideas of lighting devices. So in media architectures, we can see that for example. And I want to give 3 examples of both ways. So one way where like imaging technology is used as lighting devices, but also the other way around, to give you a brief insight what I mean by that. This was a work in 2011, I think. I learned a lot from that exactly in that point. We did an opera staging of the stage of an opera, and we had the big opportunity not only to do the video but also to create the stage, meaning that we had the whole stage in a 3D environment, and by that we could imitate real light situations via projectors. So what you can see here are 3 projectors aligned around this very big object and a kind of virtual light that is circling around the objects. And this was, in my whole career, the most authentic projection I ever produced. You could not distinguish this projection from a real life light situation, meaning the audience accepted that over the time we did that on the stage. And after they accepted that, we could also produce things like that this stage is breaking apart. But what I want to show you here is the technicians from the theater asked very excited about this technology, because you have to imagine every night they bring up a new show and they have to adjust their thousands of lamps to exactly the purposes of this show. And with just a few projectors, I was able to imitate the shadows and the highlights from a very complex object like this. And I think that in the next years to come, since these projectors are also getting very strong, we will see that projectors will take a place in lighting technology. And more as a little joke here, shortly after that I saw the first projector with the E27 socket produced for the market. So a projector that you could just screw into a lamp and then it will project a picture on your table. Another interesting, I wish I'd done that because then I would be rich, but anyway, I met the responsible guy from Mercedes-Benz, explaining exactly what they're doing there. And what they're doing is the latest S-Class of Mercedes-Benz don't have anymore a classical lighting bulb in the front devices. They project the front lights with DLP projectors. You don't believe that, but it's true. They have a 400 to 200 resolution DLP projectors in the front lights. And by that, so the idea is that the system is, for example, recognizing a person or a bicycle that is coming towards and just masking out this person out of this lighting field, or in a curve can adapt precisely to the needs in this 400 to 200 dot grid of lighting. So in this sense also, here's a DLP projector used as a lighting device, not as an imaging technology. Very interesting. Okay, a last example for the other way around. So I was asked to design, to bring in some ideas for a city that is completely built from the scratch, new somewhere in the Middle East. Don't go on specifics there. And if I have any idea of a lighting concept, I came up with this idea. So what if all the lamps inside and outside of the architectural lighting were triggered by one video layer in the background? Yeah, you just don't put extra lights on top of these buildings. It's just the conventional lighting systems that are combined in one huge master system and then triggered by a video layer that is behind that scenery, virtually behind that scenery. So since this is kind of an island that they build it, from the other side you will conceive this lighting design then as an imagery. So in this case we have the other way around, and that this is okay. Next point I just skip, but this is just the other way around, that conventional light sources as light bulbs are with an intelligence behind that can be combined to a system. Okay, this is like the one point on the technology side. The other side is like the convergence of realities that we have to consider there, and that is the most crucial thing I think about and talk about quite a lot, because in my experience as an artist doing projection mappings, I also found that the digital or the light that I project onto a building is kind of the perfect representative for the digital, and the analog is perfectly represented by the architecture. In a way, this tension had an artistical point to me. And so when we discuss like projection mapping, in my sense, this is also like referring or is inspired by the whole convergence of digital and real world. Both worlds are more and more coming together, as we see, for example, in devices like HoloLenses. This augmented reality devices where pictures are blended into your vision and overblend with the realities, or of course the artist scene that more and more take their hands on that. For example, this is a wallet and from an artist, and it connects to your bank account. And if you have quite a lot of money on your bank account, then this wallet is swallowing, and if you're broke, it's flat. So more of a joke as a device, but still, it kind of shows that the digital is more and more intertwining our daily surroundings, and is kind of leaving the frame of our desktop computers and is intertwining our daily lives. So, and this is like the basic idea, I think, that we, not as a major standard, but also that we are referring to if we are talking about projection mapping, where a digital layer is overlapping with reality. And now to my last point here is, I think that these festivals, like we can see outside there, these projection mappings are also training us as artists in a discipline that will have a huge advantage or a huge market in tomorrow. In exactly that, how do we embed the digital visually in our daily surroundings? And one more idea about that. Just compare this to visual. This is the work I done in Sydney Opera, and this is like just a random clip I took out of the internet from a music clip. And as you can see, the frequency of what is happening, the frequency of cuts from that to that is like, it's incredible fast against that which is incredible slow. So I think if you will present that to a 15-year-old boy and only show him the content that was projected, he will die of boredness. Yes, he couldn't stand because there's nearly nothing happening there. Nevertheless, producing this, and this is the point, was not an idea coming out of a concept of ours. It was the result of 10 years training what works on architecture. So the architectures, by the way, they trained us, or they brought us to the point to work reduced like that. Because if you do so, then suddenly this magic is happening where the projection and the object, the architecture, are getting to a oneness. And this like magical moment happens where you cannot distinguish no more between digital and analog. And we have kind of this phenomenon that we could talk about a dynamic architecture, not a projection mapping anymore. And I learned that it's not that we have to learn to live in a digital world. It's not that we have to accelerate up to that level of dynamic and frequency. By bringing back the digital into our daily environment, the digital has to reduce itself, has to undermine, to come to fit our needs of our daily environments. And I think that the artists dealing with light festivals and projection mapping are in a way trained to develop this new language of urban media and urban communication. By the way, this is just an analog to visualize it a little bit more. You maybe all know this video on the right in the internet, but this is a cinema movie, Her. If I would predict the future of how the digital will appear in the years to come, I would go for the whole scenery and how the digital appears in the film Her. This is a science fiction film, and the special thing in that is that the digital, it's all deeply influenced by the digital, but we nearly don't see it in the film. And I think that we are heading up to this direction, and not in the direction like this little movie shown here to the right. Okay, coming, I just saw 1 minute. Just as the last point, there's some work I done. This, by the way, was also not the major point why I decided to go into that field a little bit more. A media architecture I built on the Reeperbahn in Hamburg, where I had the opportunity to not only do the media work, but to create the whole thing. And by this opportunity, I really learned how to bring the digital and the architectural aspects in a kind of balance, so that we could talk about a hybrid object that is in between digital and real world. And this took so much of my attention and brought so much ideas on the table of how do we want to live in the future, of how do we want to perceive our cities that are digitalized in the future. And I could really bring so much to the table from my artistical background to this kind of urban planning topics that I decided to go into this field a little bit deeper, to research, to think about it, and to make my point there. And this is, by the way, a commercial where I want to end with. This is whatever. I just closed that. Thank you very much for your attention.
Merci Thorsten pour cette intervention extrêmement intéressante. Je vais passer la parole à Howard. On est complètement dans le sujet, notamment sur ce fameux thème de la projection mapping, sur laquelle j'ai souvent eu beaucoup d'idées et des critiques. Mais ce qui va nous intéresser, c'est votre travail, votre étude, votre approche sur ces projections mapping et l'architecture particulièrement. À vous, please. Thank you.
I teach at the Kent School of Architecture and at the University of Kent in the UK. This is it. We're proud to be the UK's European university. The irony is not lost on us after Brexit, of course. But there I run the master's program in architectural visualization. And most of the work that we do is to create photorealistic images of yet unbuilt architecture, as you can see from our work that's here. And that's the mainstay of what our students create. But we do other things as well, like virtual reality, of course. And of course, another aspect of that is projection mapping. So our students are involved or understanding how projection mapping skews our perception of space. And this is an interesting piece here by one of my students last year in a town called Rawabi in Palestine. And so, yes, colleague over there. We should talk later. So my student's over there. He's very keen to do some projection mapping. So my interest in the relationship between light and architecture starts here at Chambord in the Loire region. I must apologize for my really bad British pronunciation, but I'll try my best. Back in 1952, Paul Robert Houdin, the grandson of Robert Houdin, who we heard about a little earlier, was the curator of the Chambord Chateau. And he devised the phenomenon of son et lumière to draw attention to the architectural heritage in place there. So in many ways, we are still doing the same thing today, but albeit with newer and more powerful technologies. Since the invention of electricity, light has been incorporated into architecture, none more so than at the expositions at the turn of the 20th century, such as Paris and Buffalo and New York and so on. However, an inherent feature of this way of lighting structures, illuminated with bulbs and lanterns, is that the light source itself becomes the focus of the attraction. And the light, the building almost serves as a supporting structure. So with son et lumière and today projection mapping, the building and the way it is lit remains the focus and not the source of the light itself. This, I feel, sets projection mapping aside from other forms of light installations, such as media walls, LEDs, and lasers, of course. Of course, projected light, unlike screen-based technologies, can only be seen at night. The power of projectors has not quite reached the power of the sun yet. However, far from being a disadvantage, the nocturnal nature of this work, I think, encapsulates the magical qualities it can have. In daylight, a building can appear familiar, whilst at night it becomes transformed. So in identifying how projection mapping does this, I classify projection mapping installations into three categories: passive, physically active, and metaphysically active. So passive projections do not seek to harness a relationship between the animation and the building canvas. In many cases, the building serves purely as a screen or a backdrop for the animation to rest upon. A good example of this is the installation seen last year here in OFA Sans Cinema by Pixel and Pepper. The piece, using both the Hôtel de Ville and the Musée des Beaux-Arts as the canvas, referenced the historic links that Lyon has with the birth and continued development of cinema. This popular work predominantly used the two iconic buildings as large cinematic screens, only referring to the architectural detail fleetingly, as we can see here. But you can see as it did, even though it did a very small part of it, it does it in a very compelling way. It's obviously alluding to the twisting architecture of Harry Potter here. Despite this short interplay between the projection and the architecture, an OFA Sans Cinema should, I think, be considered passive overall. It's a tribute to cinema, but not really a tribute to architecture. So would this piece have been significantly different if it had been projected on a different building, such as Cathedral Saint-Jean or the Gare de Saint-Paul? This said, passive projections can have a relationship with the built canvas. So in 2014, Gilbert Coudin, his work Terre aux Lumières, was a work extensively referenced the art inside the Musée des Beaux-Arts. So this relationship now is not on the architectural geometry, but on a cultural reference with the work that's inside. It's also worth noting that this particular year, the Musée des Beaux-Arts had 300,000 visitors across the whole year going into the museum. That weekend, the 2014 weekend of the Fête des Lumières, 900,000 people saw the projection outside. So 3 times as many people saw the artwork over that weekend than saw the artwork over the whole year. So academic Dan Torr from Melbourne maintains that the site specificity is a key ingredient into projection mapping, distinguishing it away from the duplicative nature of traditional cinema. He argues that a movie can play simultaneously on 3,000 cinema screens in the world. And due to the generic nature of the screen, the movie will look more or less comparable regardless of where it's shown. Projection mapping, conversely, has an opportunity to harness a symbiotic relationship between the image and the building. Torr argues that this is a concretizing animation, whereas I prefer to think of it as animating the concrete. This, I would argue, signifies the architecturally active nature of this type of work. So we've had passive, and now this is the architecturally active work. And where the light and the architecture both have equal stake. And that's pretty much what's reflecting what Torsten was saying earlier about whether the two become synonymous with each other. So in February, renowned projection artists Roche Ashton and Karen Moniz displayed their work Line at the Cheriton Light Festival down in Folkestone, near to where we are in Canterbury. And the work involving the projection of light and dark shapes sought to create an architectural metamorphosis. The installation had previously been shown at other locations, albeit mapped to different geometries, different buildings. And this luminous cloaking of the building merely aims to sort of clothe the built form in a new skin. Patrice Warrener, a regular contributor to light festivals, including Lyon, uses light in a similar way, creating polychromatic overlays which alter the way that we look at the building. Chromolith, this is the name he gives it, exemplifies this notion of reskinning a building, I think. The augmentation of buildings in this way is far from being virtual. So going back to what we were saying about HoloLenses and augmented reality and so on, this interrelationship between projected photons of light, if we stop thinking about them as waves, rather particles of light, this interrelationship between these projected photons of light and the material surface of the architecture creates a bond that's not experienced through other forms of augmented reality. So the connectivity between the light and the structure is physical. The photons either being reflected off or absorbed into the material surface of a building. So this microscopic infusion represents the actuality of projection mapping, setting it aside from other forms of augmented reality. Again, Dan Torr argues that the overlay of digital imagery through devices such as tablets and VR headsets don't have the same relationship with architecture, where the image is in the sole experience of just that viewer. The building remains unaffected by this augmentation, whereas through projection mapping, the interplay is actual. It actually happens. And many people, of course, can share that experience. Bamber, one of the earlier pioneers of projection mapping, used the term spatially augmented reality. That's the original sort of term for projection mapping. And although we describe it now as projection mapping or video mapping and so on, I think spatially augmented reality better describes this kind of experience. So we come on to the last category, the metaphysical active projection. And in 2016, Jan Nguema and Ezekiel created Evolutions, an installation incorporated, and I use the word advisedly, incorporated into the facade of the Cathedral of St. Jean. So the cathedral is an often used canvas for this kind of type of work, projector work in the festivals. But I argue that Nguema's work really highlights the way that buildings can be metamorphosized. Evolutions was a poetic interpretation of the history of the cathedral, alluding to a wider conflict between science and religion. The intricate Gothic architectural detail appears to warp and distort, as if influenced by an extreme external force, causing the facade to ripple and deform. This interaction creates a metamorphosis of the architecture, and I would argue this is the zenith of projection mapping, where both the building and the light combine. The result is neither architecture nor light. A few years ago, my student Leanne Clark produced a series of projections that sought to interact with an unremarkable, I think it's fair to say, administrative building using similar techniques. This is a campus building in Canterbury, not my university, I hasten to add. Her series of animations interplayed with the geometry of the building, alluding to the moving windows and bouncing facades, spinning floors, and so on, showing how this type of work can affect even the most benign type of building. So where is this research leading? So each of the three types of projected works have their place in festivals like this one. But by better understanding the ways in which projected work interacts with architecture and the built environment around us, the better these installations can be tailored to elicit specific reactions and effects. I believe that the augmentation of our environment through projection mapping provides a magical irreality that cannot be compared to other light forms, allowing us to suspend our disbelief and allow ourselves to become immersed in these changing landscapes. There are installations that fully embrace the magical, sending dragons and fairies and other mythical creatures across facades and surfaces, but I believe it's the truly magical that only occurs when the building itself becomes an actor within the performance, sharing an equal stake with the animation. It's when this happens that buildings become alive. The inanimate becomes animated, and the immovable becomes immovable. Thank you.
Merci Howard. Merci aussi d'avoir pris quelques exemples, quelques images de Lyon. Et je t'invite et je vous invite tous à aller voir le spectacle de la cathédrale cette année. Parce que là aussi, par rapport à la référence qui a été faite avec Jan Nguema et Ezekiel, vous allez voir qu'il y a une nouvelle réflexion sur le travail qui n'est pas inintéressante. Et je pense aussi pour Thorsten, ça peut être très intéressant de voir le spectacle de la cathédrale. En insistant que, et tu l'as dit, que nous devons particulièrement sur un bâtiment comme une cathédrale, il y a aussi le respect de ce bâtiment par rapport aux autorités religieuses ou par rapport aux gens qui fréquentent ce type d'établissement, c'est-à-dire les gens, les chrétiens, pour la circonstance. On rentre aussi sur des problématiques liées aux us et coutumes et aux usages. Je vais vous proposer d'abord de revenir à Jérôme et à Titia. J'avais envie de vous poser la question suivante. Globalement, quelle est vos sources d'inspiration et quel est votre processus créatif? Vous l'avez un peu expliqué, mais est-ce que vous pouvez un peu plus le développer, notamment Titia, ce qui me paraît, je pense que tout le monde a compris, ce qui était très intéressant, c'est qu'on parle beaucoup de lumière, de festival lumière et de nuit, et finalement, ton travail, beaucoup de choses se passent de jour, et je trouve que c'est quand même assez intéressant, voire exceptionnel.
Yes, well, thank you. Well, the inspiration, it depends, because I start with the history of a site, the architecture, also the movement of people, what's required, how do they move, do you want them to stop, do they stay, and do you want to have silence, do you want to have interaction on the street? So it's a lot of, first you start with research and asking yourself what do they need, and also what do I need, and also bringing back like the bridge with the daylight, bringing back the something that it's already there but it's invisible, so you make things visible again.
Oui, alors moi je suis aussi d'accord avec Ticia. Les sources d'inspiration, elles sont multiples, mais ça passe déjà par une analyse du contexte, de l'espace d'où on se trouve quand on nous propose un lieu ou quand on choisit un lieu. Forcément, la magie ou l'histoire ou le contexte nous interagit avec ce qu'on pense et nous donne envie de développer une idée. Après, en fonction de notre sensibilité, l'architecture, on en a suffisamment parlé dans les interventions précédentes, elle compose l'espace public, donc c'est une source d'inspiration. On peut la déformer, la révéler avec la lumière, avec du mapping, mais le mapping c'est aussi de la lumière sur l'architecture, donc tout ça est lié et se mélange. J'aime bien les manières dont ont abordé mes collègues qui sont avec moi, parce que finalement chacun avec sa technique ou son angle de vision, le mapping ou l'objet, on est là pour apporter une émotion et finalement les choses se rejoignent et se mélangent. Enfin, moi les inspirations elles sont multiples. L'idée aussi c'est que la Fête des Lumières à Lyon elle a 20 ans. Que beaucoup de projets sont passés et peuvent avoir aussi nourri une inspiration, ou au contraire peuvent nous forcer à aller au-delà de ce qu'on a déjà vu pour venir chercher encore de l'émotion, produire quelque chose de nouveau.
La prochaine question que j'aimerais vous poser, parce que je suis quand même quelqu'un de très pragmatique, c'est toujours très intéressant dans ce type de présentation de raconter les succès. C'est toujours des belles success stories. Mais est-ce que vous pouvez, y compris pour Thorsten, nous donner une anecdote d'une difficulté de réalisation d'un projet, je dirais aussi par rapport à comment il a pu être compris par le public ou par rapport à ce que vous vouliez en faire. Si chacun a une anecdote là-dessus, je pense en tout cas les trois premiers, moi, Howard, je pense que c'est aussi intéressant de montrer la difficulté de passer d'un processus créatif à sa mise en place sur l'espace public et à sa... Alors, soit il y a eu une difficulté technique, mais là je crois que c'est pas très intéressant, mais comment ça a été appréhendé? Qui est-ce qui veut commencer? Thorsten, maybe?
I mean, when I should reveal the failures of Urban Green, I could do that, and also the difficulties, because every project was in a way difficult. Maybe two things come to my mind. One thing is, like I talked this, or I pointed this out in the media architecture realm, is to create this kind of balance between the projection mapping and the architecture. And this could be something in a technical way first. So if the image is not strong enough to take the architecture, meaning strong enough in this case, bright enough to create the illusion of this augmented layer on top, the whole thing doesn't work out. But we had also the other day, other way around. I remember in Blaue Nacht Nürnberg on a staging. So they were trained. It is a festival, a lighting festival, and they were trained to shut down every surrounding light, because we all know surrounding light is destroying kind of the illusion of it. And they were very good by it, and they were so good that it was like super dark. It was, you couldn't see the hands in front of your nose. And what happened there was, and this was like really interesting for us, the pictures seemed to be kind of a screen picture, just a picture in the dark, and all the strength of the architecture itself had been lost, and all the strength of the surrounding was not there anymore. So what we said is, can you please put like artificial light, or put some lighting on the houses around, and a little bit even on top of the architecture, because that is what it's about. It's about playing with the architecture, and it's kind of the presetting of the people that know their architecture. Sometimes they also have a relationship, an even emotional relationship to the architecture, and you play with that. That is always, just like you said, always the starting point of any production. And if you don't hit the balance right, this is like a problem, and we failed sometimes in that. And the other thing, just the short thing, is that I really, over the time, try to de-accelerate our work, really try to reduce it until a level that it's really, that you don't even see the effect no more. Is it moving or is it not moving? Because I found that there is a special tension in this magic when you don't even reveal no more that this is an artistical stage, in that you put the question to the heads of the people, what is this, what they see. And sometimes the audience didn't got that idea because they were coming in an expectation of being entertained in a way that cinema or TV is entertaining. And this whole habit of, I gonna watch a film now, of the audience, is something that we continuously had to fight against. And this expectation sometimes also led to criticism. That they said, this is not colorful enough, this is not fast enough, this is too less for my eyes. I don't know.
Merci Thorsten. Je vais demander aux autres intervenants de répondre. Si vous pouvez faire une réponse, pardon Thorsten, un peu plus courte pour qu'on puisse passer à une question supplémentaire après. Qui est-ce qui veut répondre, Titia?
Okay. Well, the audience participation is like for Juicy Lights. They wanted to have this work, but for an artwork, I had to get all the permission from all the residents. So that makes it really strange for me, because otherwise the government will, or the city will arrange the permits, and I had to do myself. And it was fun, but it was also a kind of hiccup. And because most people, they want to have this work, but it was also like, yeah, I don't know. But if you're saying, well, what's a problem? Sometimes that kind of things you don't think about it in this whole process, and you want to work with the people, but they have something. Then they want to sell their houses, and then they're saying, well, I don't know if with the artwork I can sell it, and well, so very practical.
Alors les difficultés, on peut en avoir, elles peuvent être multiples. L'espace public est finalement une des premières difficultés. Quand on fait nos interventions, on a vu qu'on travaille dans la ville, sur l'architecture, on doit combiner avec forcément le public, et les difficultés, je pense qu'elles sont multiples. Après, c'est de ces difficultés se nourrir pour essayer de les surmonter et de proposer quelque chose où on va jouer presque avec les difficultés. Je ne veux pas parler de problèmes techniques, mais ça arrive sur des projets. On a des difficultés. L'année dernière, pour pas en parler, sur Météor, le vent est arrivé sur cet espace, et ces grandes tuiles et ces grandes voiles qu'on a installées devenaient, c'est comme si on avait mis un immense bateau, et là on a bien cru que tout allait passer par terre. Et les gens, je me rappelle dans le public, quand on a commencé, on a eu deux grosses difficultés avec le vent, c'est que les voiles ont commencé à battre, et ils pensaient que finalement c'était un effet supplémentaire, un effet spécial, oui, un effet supplémentaire qui faisait bouger l'image et tout ça. Et puis, donc, finalement, des fois, l'anecdote ou l'accident peut amener une émotion, une compréhension, et on peut en jouer. Le deuxième événement aussi, c'est la boule qui est venue flirter avec le bâtiment. Et ça nous a créé là un autre désordre parce qu'il a fallu réparer rapidement. On avait prévu une alternative. Mais voilà, il faut se nourrir, jouer avec.
Yeah, I think one of the advantages of being in academia is that a failed experiment is not a failed project, and we can come away and learn an awful lot from something which has not been successful. So I think that's one of the advantages we have with that. But that said, most of our projects are in the public realm, and so they do elicit a reaction and so on. But I think the majority of our sort of projects that have gone wrong, I think, in inverted commas, stem from the z-axis, if you like. So if we're thinking about the facade being x and y axes, it's the z-axis about either extruding from or intruding into that surface. And I think and that all comes down to vantage point, where you're actually viewing the projection from. So of course we've seen many projection mapping installations on YouTube where the camera is in exactly the right sweet spot to be able to view the immersive effects of that. But of course, if you have a large audience looking at that, each of those participants is seeing a different version of your projection. And I think that's something that's quite key, and that's why I think Nguema's work works so well, because the work extrudes just to the right amount before it it's not taking it too far before it becomes unbelievable from particular angles.
Merci. Au passage, je t'invite à amener des étudiants à Lyon l'année prochaine parce que nous avons une session de workshop mapping avec deux semaines de formation plus un travail qui est présenté au collège Jean Moulin sur la colline de Fourvière cette année avec une vingtaine d'étudiants qui viennent un peu essentiellement de France, et je pense que ça serait vraiment intéressant de compléter avec des étudiants de ton université. J'avais une dernière question avant de vous passer la parole. Ça s'adresse plus à Thorsten et à Howard. Par rapport à votre réflexion qui est déjà très complète et très engagée, comment voyez-vous cette notion de projection, de mapping, et voire au-delà, comme tu l'as dit Thorsten, dans une intégration dans l'éclairage pérenne? On va même aller plus loin dans un master plan d'urban lighting. Parce que vous savez qu'on est tous victimes de la possibilité de faire joujou avec la lumière, avec la projection, un peu n'importe comment. Et notamment nous à Lyon, je parle pour Thierry, on a bâti notre expérience, enfin notre savoir-faire, notre renommée sur une cohérence de plan lumière, et qu'il y a un festival lumière, mais dans la vie de tous les jours, comment ces différentes expressions et techniques peuvent s'intégrer pour garder une beauté de la ville, ou en tout cas une beauté selon nos critères. J'aimerais bien que tous les deux vous puissiez répondre rapidement à cette question avant de passer la parole à la salle.
Yeah. I guess one of the problems with projection mapping is that, as Michel was saying in the first session, that the goal of most artists is the wow factor, and as soon as the more projection mapping there is, the less likely there is to be a wow factor, because it's something we're familiar with and so on. So for projection mapping to become part of a permanent installation, I think there's a danger of fatigue, of projection mapping fatigue, and that can be a danger. I think if it's incorporated in the way that Torsten's been saying, where it actually the projection mapping becomes invisible and becomes part of the architecture, it's actually part of the architectural design in the first place, then I think that it's a way to avoid that.
Yeah, it's really hard for me to answer in short to that, but I try. So first of all, we see that already. Middle East, China is very ahead of it when we talk about media architectures, so that media is part of an architecture, so that we can see that. But I think we're still in a stage where we try around and even not figure out how to make really sense out of it. And I would point out just one thing. If you if you view that from an architectural point of view, I think before we have a big storytelling or even advertising at the we really have to make up our minds that we're have 10,000 of years of architectural studies now, right? And all the studies were based on an architecture that didn't change over time, or at least not like we can do now, right? So they were producing something like this that will overlast over a long time, a point of time. And now we're heading a phase where architecture is getting a timeline, right? And to figure out that crucial change to architecture is the first thing. So and I want to give this question, I don't want to answer this, I want to give these questions back to all the architects among us because they have to take over this topic. A media facade is a facade, nevertheless. We shouldn't give this to the advertising industry, and we shouldn't give that to the artist, because the urban space is not an art gallery, right? We can make a festival once a year, but this whole topic of mediatization of urban space has to be also integrated into architectural thinking, like you are already doing, but the whole scene is not doing. And I would give that lead on this question or to the architects among us and in the world. Make up your mind how to do that, because it will come. Digital revolution will not stop in our environments. It will take also the surfaces of our city, that's for sure. And we have to make up our mind, how is this sensible or not.
Merci Thorsten. Je crois malheureusement qu'il n'y a pas beaucoup d'architectes dans la salle, mais c'est pas très grave, mais ça nous donnera une idée pour te faire... je te laisse revenir, voilà. Ça nous donnera l'occasion de te faire revenir et puis d'échanger avec des urbanistes et des architectes. Là, tu as beaucoup plus des organisateurs de festivals et des artistes lumière. On va passer aux questions de la salle. On a combien de temps encore, Mr. Marc? 10 minutes, ça va. S'il vous plaît, n'hésitez pas. Je pense que la qualité des présentations et des échanges sont intéressants. Je pense que on a franchi un petit step pour activer un peu nos neurones sur une réflexion. Donc n'hésitez pas à participer, à échanger avec nos intervenants.
Oui, donc moi je voulais plutôt intervenir sous la forme d'un témoignage finalement des échanges que l'on a avec Jean-François sur cette question du temps de la lumière pérenne et du temps de la lumière événementielle. Pour nous, on a eu d'ailleurs il n'y a pas très longtemps une réunion à ce sujet au plus haut niveau. Il est important en fait de savoir installer la fête dans le moment de la fête et faire en sorte que la lumière pérenne soit un temps qui permette justement de faire venir la fête. Et ça, c'est quand même quelque chose qui aujourd'hui nous inquiète. Enfin, en tout cas, moi j'ai cette inquiétude, c'est-à-dire que la signature nocturne, le paysage nocturne, quand on veut l'installer, ça prend des décennies. Le plan lumière de Lyon, c'est 30 ans de travail. Et 30 ans de travail, c'est quelque part 30 ans pour installer une identité sur un territoire. Et vouloir ensuite amener cette lumière qui bouge, qui va dans tous les sens, je trouve que c'est un vrai risque pour l'identité de nos villes. Et le risque, c'est la banalisation, finalement, d'un territoire, enfin de territoires qui vont se ressembler. Et moi, j'aime beaucoup la réflexion de Thorsten qui dit que finalement, parce que les médias façades, c'est sûr, enfin, c'est quelque chose qui arrive de plus en plus sur nos territoires, donc avec, bien évidemment, la partie publicitaire qui prend le dessus. Et j'ai trouvé très intéressant de dire, finalement, ces médias façades, ça devrait être une architecture. Voilà, c'est un élément de l'architecture, c'est-à-dire qu'on ne le considère pas comme une suite de galeries, on ne le considère pas non plus comme simplement un élément publicitaire, mais comme un élément effectivement de l'architecture. Et ça, je pense qu'il faut qu'on y soit vigilant, qu'on soit collectivement vigilant. Donc voilà, je ne sais pas si vous partagez cette réflexion sur justement ce risque de banalisation et d'uniformisation de nos paysages nocturnes.
Est-ce que quelqu'un veut réagir ou poser une autre question, ou je redonne la parole à nos intervenants, mais il y a certainement d'autres questions dans la salle.
It's really interesting what you just said and what Thorsten and Howard you're saying about media facade and all that. And it reminds me that look at this place, you know, it's full decoration. Since centuries, it's the same decoration. And at other points, the great architect Sullivan was the teacher of Frank Lloyd Wright. And still Sullivan was decoration. There was some decoration, and Frank Lloyd Wright we said no decoration anymore on building. And then we had Le Corbusier, Mies van der Rohe, and all those new architects that wanted to see the structure and wanted to see blind walls and no decoration. So I think the big challenge is that the video mapping or moving facade is not just bringing back this decoration era. It's ephemer. It's not because it's light. It can change, and I think we have to really, like the Mr. that just talked. We really have to be aware of this fatigue of seeing things moving all the time. If it's done in a really simplistic way and talking to the soul of people, it's trees, the leaves on the trees are moving all the time, and it's beautiful, and it's not just annoying, it's nature is slowly moving all the time, the clouds and everything. So I think if we think about the time of the event, which is short, like Thorsten, the great example you showed about this great video on the Sydney Opera and this really fast video. Time of television is really fast, but the time of nature, and I think the time in a city should be slower down. And if we think about this, there will be no fatigue, I think. It's just a way of thinking, stretching time. A building is there for many, many years, centuries. So if we put light on the building, we have to think that it's going to be there for a very long time, not just 5 minutes.
Can I say something? I very much agree with the last both ideas. Just to add on, yes, facades always had been communicating in the past already. So this is not the change. The change is that they're changing over time, right? And that you brought up the idea of identity. This is exactly where we have to start and ask ourselves. Because first of all, how can something that constantly changes over time provoke something like a commonly shared identity? This is a question. But to answer or to pick up the tree always is like moving, but it has a certain identity to itself. So maybe we can learn from that, or to just throw in another philosophy idea of arts in the music. Yeah, right. You have a music piece, and that either doesn't have any point where you can stop it and say this is the identity of this music piece, but it's still you hear the first bars and you have an exact idea of this. So maybe we have to think in that way, that we see a building and that is composed like a music piece, but still has a very strong identity to it, and doesn't necessarily have to communicate, but is moving over time with a certain pattern that is recognizable. I don't know yet. I'm just saying we have to figure that out. But these are both like, I totally agree with that.
These are very exciting times.
Super exciting times, super.
Oui, c'est sûr qu'on est, je ne sais pas si on est à un carrefour, mais d'abord, comme vous l'aviez souligné, quand on parle de Patrice Varener et de la colorisation des bâtiments, ça existe. Il a fait des expériences à Lyon avant le Festival Lumière. Beaucoup de choses ont évolué. On est passé aussi d'un support qui était la grande diapositive aux médias vidéo, voire au-delà, donc même avec cette notion de réalité augmentée. Donc c'est vrai que c'est une période passionnante parce qu'on est tout à fait à la croisée des chemins et on avance. Est-ce qu'il y a encore une ou deux questions dans la salle?
Environnementale de média façade. Est-ce qu'on ne doit pas considérer la partie consommation d'électricité média façade, le futur, l'environnement? Est-ce que c'est compatible?
Ok, je pense que les gens qui sont le mieux, voilà, c'est pour Thorsten. Est-ce que tu as...
Please define compatible. The last one I didn't got. Is it...
I was trying to say how Media Facade is compatible with trying to use less power in the world. How can we make that work as part of the architecture plans?
Right. So, I mean, this is not to be answered in general. This has to be answered to the specific projects. But on one hand, there are some very nice ideas to integrate also solar and together like energy for the night, right, for producing the, or driving the installation. On the other hand, in the most cases, because advertising is standing, in the most cases, still behind their technologies, they want to have like very high dense pictures like that, and these are really energy, high level consumption devices. So as long as we think in this idea of Media Facade, we are also forced to put very much energy to drive these systems. But as soon as we think in alternatives way of media or creating changing light, we are more and more close to like conventional LED facade lighting, I think. In the moment, this is like dominant, so this is why the argument is good, and Media Facade thereby is not environmental, from this environmental aspect, strong topic.
Voilà, je pense que je vais finir par vous faire une petite réponse aussi. Ne pensez pas qu'à la consommation d'énergie, mais pensez aussi à ce qu'on peut imposer ou d'une manière, enfin imposer au public. Je trouve que le respect aussi, c'est de ne pas imposer peut-être certaines installations qui peuvent paraître agressives, et que l'émotion qu'on peut obtenir pendant 4 jours dans un festival où l'on vient voir des choses, si on est sur une durée plus longue avec des procédés qui technologiquement sont consommateurs, mais peuvent aussi nous générer des gènes dans notre façon, dans nos usages, dans notre vie. Et je crois que c'est presque plus important que de réfléchir, que de parler de consommation énergétique. Ça sera le mot de la fin, en tout cas pour ce qui me concerne.
Absolutely. Please join me in thanking our speakers and the moderator. It's been really great session. Thank you so much. We've had a mind-blowing discussion this morning. What a source of inspiration. And I think this is generally an invitation to continue our work together, go even further together on these topics. Extremely interesting. And I also invite you to follow what Lucy is doing, because we continue those discussions. Maybe you can follow also on Twitter, on Facebook, on our website. And really, I want to thank all of you again, and also the speakers of the first session this morning.